Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. The events in the Middle East dominate the news cycle. The shoot down of a Russian warplane by two warplanes. Turkey is a NATO member. This is a NATO member firing and causing casualties. Fog of war, we can't be certain, but the reports out of Moscow tonight were one dead pilot and one dead Russian Marine in a rescue effort. The reports out of Moscow also pointed to the forces on the ground, which are al-Nusra, that would be the terrorists by some definition, but the anti-Assad forces by other definitions, forces on the ground shooting to kill the Russian pilot bailed out of the Sukhoi 24 and shooting to kill with an American tow missile. Remember, this is fog of war. None of this is confirmed against the Russian rescue helicopter. That dominated the news cycle almost so much that the joint press conference by the President of the United States and the President of France, responding to the crisis ever since the attack on Paris by ISIS, was overwhelmed. Not overwhelmed, however, is the presidential candidates are underway looking for programs to connect to the American people. And we're told repeatedly foreign policy is not the top item when it comes to the voting booth. And we're looking at the primaries now in February. So I welcome my colleague and co-host, Larry Kudlow of CNBC and Kudlow on the weekend, because though foreign policy is tempting, and Larry and I will address this in the course of our conversation tonight, we'll speak to California, to Kori Schake about the Syrian crisis. We begin with the question of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, the Democratic senator from Vermont, describes himself as a democratic socialist. And in a recent speech and address at Georgetown University, he defined democratic socialism. Larry, a very good evening to you. It would appear that democratic socialism, from the speech that Bernie Sanders gave, is indistinguishable, according to Bernie Sanders, from the government of the United States, from the United States of America, certainly from the Democratic Party. So, nothing to worry about, right, Larry? We already live inside a democratic socialist state. Good evening to you, Larry.
Well, good evening, John. And, gee, I hate to say it, but we do not live in a socialist state. Far from it. Although that may be an election theme. I think this talk about socialism, which is pulling Hillary to the left, is really going to damage the Democratic Party. And most of these Republicans have pretty good tax plans, tax reform plans, and deregulation plans, and trying to help out small and large businesses. They're running on growth, most of them. Maybe emphasize it more, but they're growth. John, growth solves a lot of problems. Growth solves middle-class problems. Growth solves jobs problems. Growth solves poverty. You can take from the rich as much as Bernie Sanders wants, and all you're going to do is damage the economy and make everybody poorer. I mean, this whole argument is just as nutty as a fruitcake. I've never seen anything like it. And, you know, look what's going on. You got progressives talking about how the problem is poverty, not inequality, and the solution is growth. And I mean, I just think Sanders is divorced from reality, and Hillary's going down the same path. So, I mean, they're just losers. That's all.
We welcome Steve Moore of the Heritage Foundation. Good evening, Steve. I read from Senator Sanders' address. The rich get much richer. Almost everyone gets poorer. Super PACs funded by billionaires by elections. Ordinary people don't vote. We have an economic and political crisis in this country, and the same old establishment politics and economics will not effectively address it. There it is, Steve. There's nothing to be done except for endorse Senator Sanders and the confiscatory tax regime he approaches. Are we growing, Steve, towards Senator Sanders? Is that where Mrs. Clinton is taking us? Good evening, Steve.
Well, hi, John. Look, I think we have two Sanders in this race. We have Bernie Sanders, and now we have Hillary Sanders, and I prefer Hillary Clinton. And you know, I've tried to give Hillary the benefit of the doubt over the last year or two because her husband was a centrist, economically successful president who promoted free trade and balanced budgets and limited government. Actually, you know, John, the size of the government actually fell under Bill Clinton, thanks in part to a Republican Congress, but I think Bill Clinton was a genuine fiscal conservative. Hillary has been tugged further and further to the left, and I think it's a big political mistake for her. By the way, I think the American people are going to reject socialism, and I just add to what Larry said. You know, look, the enduring lesson of what's happening around the world today is that socialism is failing everywhere. I mean, Greece. All you have to do is look at what's happened in Greece. They're bankrupt. It doesn't work there. It doesn't work in Puerto Rico. It hasn't worked in Argentina. It hasn't worked in Venezuela. It hasn't worked in France or Italy or Spain. It hasn't worked in Detroit. It hasn't worked in Connecticut, right, Larry? And so why would we want to adopt this model? And I think the answer is that the liberal Democrats for a long, long time have had what I call Euro envy. They want America to be more like Europe in terms of, the social welfare programs and the high tax rates and the green energy programs. And you look at what's happening in Europe, putting aside the terrorism, their economies have been extremely weak. I mean, people are leaving Europe because half of Europe is in a recession. Why do we want to be more like them, Larry?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I think the middle of the Democratic Party in a general election is going to be up for grabs with this kind of rhetoric. See, that's where this is going to go. And if the Republicans play their cards right and, have sensible tax reform and regulatory reform and, stop the EPA from closing down all the power industries, change Obamacare so it is affordable and people have real choice. This gives what Sanders is doing, and you're right, Hillary is following. What they're doing is just opening the door for the Republicans to take the middle. And furthermore, regarding foreign policy and ISIS, the Democrats have nothing to say. If the Republicans can lead on this issue, basically destroy ISIS should be their rallying cry. This issue, too, Democrats are going to leave their party in droves because they do not want to be killed by ISIS terrorists. And this whole thing is going to really damage the Democrats.
I would just add one thing to that, John, because obviously elections are won and lost by the old Reagan Democrats. So Ronald Reagan won, and then they swing back to Clinton, and they swung back to Barack Obama. And I agreed entirely that Republicans should win back the middle class, especially since the middle class has been hammered by Obama's policies. But, a lot of those Reagan Democratic voters you're talking about, Larry, are Trump supporters. And while you and I don't agree with everything Donald Trump says and believes in, we have to be very attentive to those Trump voters, because those are the people who could decide the election, and there are a lot of them. There are millions of them.
I want to read from Senator Sanders' address exactly what he says about democratic socialism before you comment, Larry. In my view, says Senator Sanders, it's time we had democratic socialism for working families, not just Wall Street, billionaires, and large corporations. It means that we should not be providing welfare for corporations, huge tax breaks for the very rich, or trade policies which boost corporate profits as workers lose their jobs. It means that we create a government that works for all of us, not just powerful special interests. It means that economic rights must be an essential part of what America stands for. Larry, this is protectionism. This is a super state. This is the state control of commerce. And Senator Sanders is presenting it as a rescue of the American middle class. Have we failed, Larry? Have all the conversations these years with you and your colleagues on CNBC, have they fallen on people who are deaf to the fact that what makes America great and prosperous is free trade and capitalism, not government mandates?
Well, look, I think the free trade issue is not being well done by the Republican Party. And this is an area where I disagree with Donald Trump. You want to help America, and you want to stop the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese do a lot. They're bad actors. I mean, they counterfeit and they steal our property rights and so forth. They're bad actors, but the way to get at them is not taxing rich people, and it's not putting up tariffs. Tariffs only hurt consumers and the middle class. They should have the best quality goods at the lowest prices all around the world. Republicans need to say that, okay? And we really should slash the corporate tax rate and go to full expensing for investment and bring the money back home, make it a territorial system, stop punishing profits and so forth. That's the way to get at China. Not tariffs, not protectionism. Now, Republicans need to say that, and I'm not sure they are on that question. I agree with you, the Democratic Party is protectionist. But most of all, people are revolting against government across everybody, from Trump on down. They are revolting against government. They are revolting against government assistance. They're revolting against government welfare. They're revolting against deficits and debt and all the rest of it. So the GOP plays its cards right. They have tremendous openings in the coming election next year. That's if they play their cards right. Grow the pie larger. Don't penalize success. Reward success. It can't be any simpler than that, John.
I agree, Steve, that the Republican candidates are not being clear about why we're prosperous.
Why we're what?
Why we are prosperous. It's because of trade, and it's
a lot of Americans aren't feeling very prosperous right now. You know, I mean, I think Americans are, as Larry used the word, cranky, and I think that's right. I mean, look, there's a lot of middle class anxiety out there, and you just see that in every poll. You know, incumbents everywhere are losing. First, you know, Republicans win the Kentucky Senate race with surprise, and then Louisiana, you know, elects a Democrat because they didn't like the incumbent. There's an anti-Washington stand. And what I would add to what Larry said, one thing that I think that Democrats are trying to portray Republicans as kind of crony capitalists who give insider deals to Wall Street and to the big banks and the insurance companies, and, you know, the people who get, shafted by that are the middle class. And Larry, I think the Republicans need to do a better job of disassociating themselves with the cronyism, you know. And I'd like to see Republicans even, you know, they might have to say, look, we probably shouldn't have done these bailouts. You know, it's not what free market capitalism is. I don't want Republicans to be the party of bailouts. And right now, a lot of Americans think they are. They have to be the party of free market capitalism. And I want to mention one quick issue, John, that Larry almost gets tired of me mentioning so often. The Democrats are completely on the wrong side of the energy issue. And when we've got ISIS that's getting $5 million a day with their petrodollars, we ought to be, number one, bombing their oil fields, and number two, pumping.
We'll speak of that when we come back. Steve Moore of the Heritage, Larry Kudlow, CNBC, and Kudlow Radio on the Weekend. I'm John Batchelor.